and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Highr's Summer of Learning. To those of you who have been with us before, we welcome you to our final webinar in the Summer of Learning series. To those of you who are joining us today for the first time, welcome to Highr. My name is Pallavi Dwivedi and I'm the founder of Highr. And today we bring to you a very, very exciting and important panel on discussing what has emerged as one of the most wanted skills that teachers are required to develop and should develop in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, and as we gear up for schools opening up their doors for students, and as we contemplate ways in which we can now adapt and shift gears and come up with new ways for teaching and learning, leadership skills for teachers are something that all of us are now beginning to think about and reimagine. So join me today as I welcome all of you to a wonderful discussion on how teachers are perhaps setting the tone for the change that we'd like to see take place in our classrooms, and to a considerable degree, a conversation that perhaps has already started taking place. So before we get started with introducing the panel, I just wanted to very quickly take you over some housekeeping rules. So I'll just share my screen with all of you so we can just very quickly go over these. During this webinar, the panelists cannot see you. We won't be using the raise your hand feature in this session. We only use the Q&A option for asking questions. For those of you who'd like to put in your observations or ask questions to one another, or if you have any sharing or any learnings that you'd like to put across, please feel free to do that in the chat box. We do request you to put your questions specifically in the Q&A so that we can get to them faster. We do encourage a lot of healthy debate, a lot of open conversation, but we also request you to at all times be kind and be considerate and to use your discretion when you are conversing with others in the chat box. The webinar proceedings for today will be recorded and they will be sent across to all those of you who have registered. This webinar is also being broadcast live across our Facebook group. So for those of you who have colleagues who'd like to join us in via Facebook Live, you can prompt them to that. You can point them to that as well. I just wanted to situate our conversation today within Highr's larger ambit of quality teaching. Every week we have, over the last 4 weeks, brought you conversations around the 4 most important aspects or domains of quality classroom teaching. And at Highr, we believe that these are the 4 most fundamental pillars around which teachers must organize their classroom teaching and learning. The first one being planning for classroom delivery, the second one being designing instruction, the third one being managing student progress, and the fourth one being practicing professionalism, which really is the focus of today's webinar's discussion. How is it that as professionals, we can grow our teaching practice? How is it that we can embrace leadership skills and change and adapt our teaching styles to become change makers within the classroom? So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to very quickly introduce you to today's panel. Wait, that does involve me to start sharing my screen again. I'm sorry about that. I'd like you to first welcome our first panelist for today, Tamera Musiowsky-Borneman. Tammy is an educator and an ed consultant. She's also the president of the ASCD Emerging Leaders Alumni Affiliate. ASCD is our knowledge partners for this session, and we're very happy to have Tammy as well as one of our other panelists, Kevin, from who are both associated with the ASCD. I'd also like to introduce you to Ms. Gowri Ishwaran. She actually requires no introduction to those of us who have been within the teacher and education space. Ms. Ishwaran is a Padmashri Awardee. She's also the founder principal of Sanskriti School in New Delhi. and is one of the stalwarts when it comes to anything and everything to do with K-12 education in India today. We're very, very happy to have you with us to talk to us about leadership skills, Gowri ma'am, so welcome. The third panelist for today is Kevin Simpson. Kevin is also an educator, and he's also the founder of KDSL Global, which is having interesting conversations with teachers around the world around some of the things that we are going to be talking about today. So looking forward to picking your brains on exactly that, Kevin, and welcome to today's session. Our last panelist, last but not the least, is Meeta Sengupta. Meeta is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and is also an education consultant as well as a strategy advisor, and is associated with the Center for Education Strategy. Meeta, again, is another leading voice within the education space in India today, and has lots of wonderful insights on what leadership means for teachers in classrooms. So we're really looking forward to hearing your views on this topic today, Meeta. Now I can finally stop sharing my screen, and with that, I can pass the floor, the mic, whatever you'd like to call it, over to our first panelist for today's session, Tammy. So Tammy, over to you to talk to us about teachers as change makers and leadership skills at school.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, for inviting me to the panel. I've really enjoyed watching the sessions over the month, and I can't believe that the month has already gone by. It's the closing panel, and yeah, I just remember first finding out that I would be part of the closing panel, and I thought, oh yeah, you know, I've got a month to prepare, and then all of a sudden it was here, and it's been an exciting month to watch your panel, so thanks for the invitation for sure. I'm quite excited to share a little bit about educational change makers and influencers, so I'm just gonna pop my screen over here for a few slides. So as Pallavi mentioned, I'm an educator and ed consultant. So I've worked in a number of roles in education since 1998, yeah, back in the 90s. So I started out in education as a special needs assistant, as they were called at that time, working with kids one-to-one. And I've just worked, I fell in love with that role, and then I decided to progress through a number of roles. So I've been a classroom teacher, a coach, a coordinator in Edmonton, Canada, New York City, and here in Singapore. So I've got a wide range of thoughts about this topic on ed influencers and change makers. So just kind of thinking about the time that we're facing right now and have been the last several months, there isn't really a better time than now to be an educator who wants to have an influence and make change in any arena in which they're involved. So I was thinking that there's a number of arenas in which educators can do, can think about where they want to have their influence. And it can be really daunting to think about where to start. So I figured if we kind of looked at the whole scope of what an educator does and who we are and all of the places in which we have impact, we can really bring it down to the individual level to start. And so when we think of the work of an educational influencer, if we start at our level in the classroom, in the school, at that level even, we think about, like, can I even make a difference? What will my influence be? How can I make change if I'm just a classroom teacher or just a paraprofessional or a principal? And I kind of turn off to the fact, sometimes we say, I'm just a teacher, but that's just a terrible way to think about our role and how much influence we have in education on so many levels. So yes, anyone in education can do this, of course. It is definitely overwhelming because there are the breadth of education is enormous, but it's very exciting at the same time when you do kind of pinpoint the area in which you want to have your greatest impact. It can be definitely daunting, and I think we're facing that right now with a lot of things that we're looking at in terms of going back to school or not, with COVID still embracing the world, with shifting educational practices so they are more anti-racist. It can be intimidating for teachers to look at all of the changes that have to be made, but those changes are necessary, and we're in this time where we can really have transform education from an old model into something that's much better for students and teachers. And of course, that's really complex, and there's many, many layers involved in that, and we need all of the educators and stakeholders that we can to be involved in the process, because there are so many different layers to it. But we can simplify to the point at which we want to have our greatest impact. So if you think about yourself then as an educational influencer, I kind of boiled it down to these 4 areas. So if you really focus in on the role that you're in right now, and if you reevaluate or evaluate your beliefs and what education actually means to you and what you want it to mean for students, that's the place where you can start. Because when you really can identify what it is you believe that education is, you can change a lot in your small sphere, and then that will have that ripple effect. So with that, then of course, is teaching with passion and leading with passion. So once people in the field of education in any role figure out that belief system, then it's much easier to determine or to just lead and teach with passion, because you know that's what you really want to do. You want to have that impact in classrooms. You want to have the impact with your colleagues. You want to have those conversations that need to be had, and then make steps to take action in whatever way that needs to look. So then with that, of course, you realize who's in your circle at your school. So do you feel like you're alone at the time, or who can you reach out to find out, well, who's in the same boat as I am, and who wants to kind of make a plan for what we can do to move forward. And that, again, it just depends on your context, your role, and what your belief system is. But when you find people that you can connect to and make plans with, then your influencer circle starts growing. And then finally, we have to be at that place where we can learn from our mistakes and lead through them. We're in the time right now where everything can seem like a giant mistake and can be very detrimental to health and safety. And those are the kinds of mistakes, obviously, we want to be very careful of. But in the process of transforming education, there are going to be those mistakes that we can use those as places to learn from and then move forward so that we can progress and make the change that we need to have happen. And so having said all of that, I found this quote by an unknown author, which is kind of fitting in this big scheme of education and what's happening in the world. And this author said, nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something. And that is absolutely true when we look at just the scope of education and sometimes how we feel very, very small and insignificant, but it just takes one person to start a change. And so then if we come together, we can do that. And
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Tammy. Thanks a lot. It's absolutely wonderful. That quote that you actually just put out is really, really so true. It holds so true for the situation that all of us find ourselves in, with a lot of unprecedented challenges, with things that we've never really imagined before, with situations that we haven't imagined before, and teachers are finding themselves in spots that they never really thought they'd be in. And I think the most important part of of this situation is how is the potential that it has to actually galvanize so many people into thinking about the way in which classroom and school leadership needs to play out. What goes in, what should be thrown out after all of these months of teaching and learning online, and how crucial teachers are to that process. And if teachers are allowed the space to actually be able to take a lot of these decisions, in terms of what kinds of technologies they want to bring in for teaching and learning, what are some of the pedagogical shifts that they'd definitely like to continue to keep, stuff like maybe have online school one day of the week, any which way, regardless of, what sort of situation we find ourselves in. What does bother me as an educator, and has bothered me for a really long time, is that when we look at policies and we look at education, much of this isn't sort of fed in by our teachers.
Right.
And teachers really are the front lines of where education policy plays itself out. So how is it that we can actually get teachers to talk more about what they'd like to do in the classroom, what they'd like to see in the classroom, and how are some of these school cultures then created, and how do teachers navigate these school cultures as well? It's so important.
I agree, definitely. And that's one of those things that has to change, right? So
and I think I like to on. No, go on.
Oh, sorry. It just froze for a second there, but no, I absolutely agree. And that's one of those things that needs to happen right now too, is that decision-making that teachers have and the shift in the school culture and how that plays out moving forward. Because, right now in the US, there's all of these school board meetings happening that are like all day long, 9 hours, no decisions coming out of it. And then you wonder about, well, who's actually making the decisions? I don't know if it's actually teachers making the decisions, quite honestly. So that's just one of those things that needs to be reevaluated in when people think about their beliefs. What are we actually doing here? So who are we here for? So it's a lot to think about. It's very complex and complicated. But we just hope that, we can all figure something out that's best for each context. So.
Absolutely. And to talk a little bit about our context and to talk about leadership styles and building school cultures that are conducive to leadership, I'll now ask Gowri ma'am to take over and talk us through her own experiences of developing school cultures and promoting leadership skills in teachers.
Thank you, Pallavi, and you are my presentation in charge. So if you can
Absolutely.
pull up the first.
So I'm just going to.
Yep.
Straight away. There we are.
Okay, here we go. I've deliberately used the word tsunami in education because that's exactly what has happened. One day you went to school and you had your blackboard, you had your kids in front, everything was normal. And the next day you were told schools are shut and we don't know when we are going to come back again. So it's been a kind of a tsunami and everything has been turned upside down. We have been talking about technology for a long time, the goods, the bads, etc. But now we've been pitchforked into it because the only way that the schools are connecting with their students is through technology, and we are having online classes. And so everything has been turned topsy-turvy, and people are trying to figure their way out of it. Can I have the next slide now, Pallavi? Yeah, and the reason I'm called this teacher as a leader, because whatever be the decisions that are taken, the implementer is the teacher. And it is the teacher who will have to shape the whole process of what education is going to look like. It's never going to go back to what it used to be. It is going to change, and this change has to be led by the teachers. Policy makers may make whatever policy they want, but in the classroom, it is the teacher who is going to take this entire process forward. And there is a huge change in the role of the teacher as they come back to school whenever this COVID decides to leave us, because it is now their role will be more of a facilitator, somebody who helps the kids to find and navigate their way forward. And one of the most important things, whoever frames the curriculum, I think Meeta is dealing with this later, is that the personal and the societal aspects have to make sense to the children within their curriculum. It can't be like before that you just, especially in India, mug up and get marks. It's not going to work anymore. After this pandemic and after this online teaching, the children have to connect, their curriculum has to connect with their personal experiences and also the experiences in society and across the world. So this is going to be a big challenge, and this challenge has to be met by the teachers. And I have always told teachers, it's not something new. In the classroom, the teacher is the leader, because it's how you teach, how you connect, how do you engage, how do you deliver excellence in your classroom. You are the leader there. And never allow the curriculum to become your master. The curriculum is your tool. And it's up to you as a teacher in the classroom, how you deliver, how you deal with it, how you relate to your kids. And somehow I feel when you all come back now, the blended teaching model is going to take over. But remember, in the blended teacher model, despite the online teaching, there is going to be face-to-face interaction. And I think the face-to-face interaction is very important, because man is a social animal. And as John Donne said, we are not an island, we are part of a continent thereof. So therefore, in this face-to-face interaction, the teacher is going to play a very critical role. Because ahead of us, what do we have ahead of us? We have the unknowns of the 21st century yawning in before us. We don't know how it's going to pan out, what it's going to be like. So as a leader and a teacher in the classroom, you have to, more than the curriculum, you have to prepare the kids for the unknown. They have to learn that moving out of your comfort zone is not terrible, that taking risk is not wrong, that failure does not mean that it is the end of the world. You have to teach them to explore and have joy of exploration. You have to teach them to enjoy creating. In fact, these are the qualities that are going to be very, very important. And as I said, it's a teacher leader is the only person who can really bring it about. Because you've got an entire new generation, and we talk about they are going to bring about the change. How will they bring about the change unless the teacher in the classroom gives them the tools, gives them the courage to go ahead and to do such things? Therefore, as far as the teacher is concerned, it is a very critical role. They've always been leaders, and I think now their leadership role is going to assume much greater importance. My message to any teachers who are listening is, please do not underestimate your capability. Do not underestimate your importance. It is you who actually help a child develop as a human being in partnership with the parents. It's not the school management. It's not those high up in the school. It is you as an individual who will make that difference. Have you ever recollected or thought, children, adults always remember their school teachers, not their higher ed teachers as much as the school teachers. Because school teachers actually make you, they foster the good points in you. They are the ones who really encourage you and show the path ahead. It's always been that way, and it's going to be even more critical now. So therefore, teachers, you are the backbone of the future. If we want our kids to be the leaders and save this world, it's going to be through you. Another important fact is seeing the global scenario. You see the lack of ethical leadership across the planet. So one of the things that needs to come into the curriculum and which the teachers need to deal with is how do we bring our children back to understanding the values of ethics, of empathy, of caring. How do we bring this back in our children again? Can I have the next slide now, please? A lot of this depends on the school culture. Here I would like to share some of my own experiences. When I first came to Delhi, I was teaching in a school. I came from a smaller city, from Patna in Bihar. And I continued my teaching here style in the same way as I had done in Patna, where it had been very successful. I was sent for by the head of the school and told that my teaching styles were not appropriate because I was not reading out every sentence in the book. And I told her, but ma'am, I taught Shakespeare without reading every sentence in the book. But she says, I'm sorry, that's what you have to do. So I had to conform. But you know, you find ways around it. You can still make your lesson interesting. You read every line, keep the school happy, but you can do other things. But you know, thereafter I moved to another school where nobody questioned what I did in the classroom, as long as I was doing the right things. And you know, that brought about a change. That's when I changed as a teacher. I became more excited. I thought of new ways of doing things, and my whole career took off then. And even when I joined Sanskriti school, I had a management that gave me a clean slate. They said, do what you think is right. And therefore, for school leaders, if they are true school leaders, they must identify and reward their teachers by giving them that freedom. You know, the mistake we all make is we box all our faculty into one group. But people are different. There may be 10 English teachers, but each of them may have a different style of teaching. But if they are good in what they are doing, they should be encouraged. Another thing I find very often with school leaders is they don't like to delegate. Now, if you do not delegate, how do you then help your teachers and your staff to grow? So it is very important that schools, managements, the school heads understand the meaning of team. Because no school, for example, Sanskriti did make a name, but it was not only because of me. It was because I had a good team. Because after all, as head of a school cannot be sitting in every classroom. But how do you develop a good team? You develop and encourage, you nurture, you have to nurture, like teachers in the classroom nurturing their students. School leaders need to nurture their faculty and their staff. You need, considering the huge tsunami that has happened in education, a lot of training is required. A lot of hand-holding will be required. And this has to be provided by the school leaders. And they play a very important role in helping, because the teacher is still a leader in the classroom. But for that teacher to be an effective leader, to deliver what is required, the support of the school head is very critical. So when we talk about teamwork, when we talk about risk-taking, when we talk about various other things, it also applies to the school leadership. And so the communication with the teachers is very important. Unless you have your faculty buy in to whatever is your idea, whatever is your vision, it can never succeed. So a school leader needs to have good communication, needs to have the teachers, the faculty in the school buy into the ideas or the vision that you are presenting and support them in what they are trying to achieve. You know, if you have a teacher who loves children, that teacher actually cannot go wrong. All that the teacher needs is support from the top to be the kind of leader in the classroom that is required. And I'd like to end with a quote. So Pallavi, the next slide. See, this is going back to my saying that the teacher is today a facilitator and a mentor. You are not now standing with a blackboard and telling the children what to think. You are today a facilitator, helping them to think on their own. So here is a quote from Khalil Gibran. You lead your student up to the doorway and then he journeys on his own. So as a teacher, you have to nurture your students so that when they go on their journey, you have given them sufficient help, support, and tools that they can navigate their way through life. So, teachers, today you are facilitators. It is up to you to nurture, encourage the wards who are coming to you, whether through blended classroom or whichever process, to give them that ability to meet the unknown without fear and with a very clear, good heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful.
I can't hear you, Pallavi.
Back. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I was just saying, thank you so much, Gowri ma'am, for that fantastic presentation. Extremely motivating, and it helps us sort of all ground our I suppose, our inner, our intrinsic motivations to be teachers in the first place. And I think, for most part, what you talked about when you were referring to school cultures and how leadership within schools can actually make space for teachers to come in and demonstrate how they can execute changes within their own classrooms and within the wider school community. I think that's a very crucial step in ensuring that teachers are actually able to live up to their true potentials.
Yes,
and I think one of the questions,
the principal, the heads of school, therefore, need to have regular meeting. Do not, most of the time what happens is the staff is told what's to be done. Nobody ever calls them and talks to them and said, well, this is what we are thinking. What are your ideas? Maybe they suggest some better changes also. So it's, this team spirit and involving everybody in the process, asking the teachers what will work, because they are the ones who are actually on the ground. And so it's important to ask them. And, they also feel included in the decision. And that makes a huge difference in how you deliver. Like Tammy said, anyone doing any small thing, it will still have a great impact.
Absolutely correct. Anybody within the wider school community, we can have a domino effect of change with even the smallest kinds of initiatives gathering steam. So that's wonderful. I mean, and we're talking about gathering steam and how small initiatives can actually have large impacts.
Pallavi,
I think that's
can I just apologize for one thing? I know that Meeta and others have a lot of data, so therefore I did not produce any data. I didn't want to overwhelm your entire presentation.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I think all your words are more important than data at this point in time, I suppose. So I just wanted now to ask Kevin to take over and talk to us about the kind of changes that he's been observing globally with KDSL and the work that he's been doing around the world with educators, and what kind of change has he been observing, and how is it that some of that change is being brought about? So Kevin, really interested to hear what your thoughts on this are. So over to you.
All right. Unmute. All right, you should be able to hear me now. Someone asked the question, I'll answer it right now. I am not from Dubai, but I was based in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, for 8 years. My name is Kevin Simpson. I want to thank the team at Highr and Pallavi for the invite to share my story and my work in the international education space, which just spanned for some time. But to start off, I really sort of thought about this word change maker and what it means to me right now, and knowing that it might change, next week or next year. But when I think of change makers, several words pop out for me. I think of the creators, the innovators, those who question, those who disrupt, those who aren't the norm, those who speak up and speak out. And so for us, I really want us to hone and think about our story. And what is your story right now in education? What do you want your story to be? What do you want your legacy to be? And what do you see in need of change in education, no matter where you're at? So let's start off with a quick, who am I? Just quick little data and facts about who am I. I always like to start with, I'm a kid from Flint, Michigan. That's where I was born and raised, but I'm currently living in Dallas, Texas. I've been in education for over 2 decades. My big belief is that we have to put scholars first. Their voice, their choice, their everything should be paramount and at the top of the agenda when it comes to education. I've had the honor to serve in over 25 countries in different capacities, from adjunct professors, consultant, mentoring, and just a span of things all over the world. Not big on titles. My big thing is let's work, let's do work. But if we had to throw a title onto it, I like to call myself a teacher and an education starter. So again, looking and seeing where there are things that need to be done, questions that need to be asked, and how can we gather and create groups and around issues that really need to be brought to the forefront in education. For me, what stuck out when I read the description of today and the closing out was, how do I impact the world in my classroom and deliver positive change for my students, the wider school community, and society at large? So that's huge. So it's taking time to reflect on personally myself, where I'm at, when I'm in the classroom as a teacher, walking around as a part of a community, as well as thinking beyond the space in terms of where I am. So this is a question that we're going to bring and pose back to you at the end. So 10 years ago, I left the classroom. I was in Dubai, full-time teacher, and departed. And 10 years later, in 2020, I re-entered the classroom. And it has been an amazing year in terms of my learning, scholars learning, families learning, and looking and seeing sort of where education is. I started with 4 sections of writers, over 110 scholars, eager to share their voices in the writing space. And 2 months in, we went online. So for 10 weeks, we were engaged in online learning. And during the course of right at the end of school ended for us the 22nd of May, a lot of activity was going on. Obviously, we were experiencing COVID, but in the midst of that, we saw another pandemic shot off in the States. Nothing that was new, but we saw visually what happened in terms of George Floyd, Minnesota, Ahmaud Arbery, in Georgia, Breonna Taylor. And for me, it was, one of those moments. I'm a writer, I'm a Black man, I'm back in the States. And one thing that I'm never shied away from is, how do we ensure that we're providing space and place for scholars to discuss issues going on in their community, in their world, looking and listening to what they're saying, and how do we bring that into the classroom? So at the end of May, early June, I was led to write scholars and families to check in and see how they were doing. And one scholar that stood out in terms of responses, amongst all the other scholars, was just checking in and saying that, she said, Mr. S, I'm hopeful. But she said, I have some questions for you. So I want to share these questions that she shared with me, and then my response. So she asked, did I go to the protest? What did I think about this? And this meaning George Floyd. What did I do when I heard the news? Why would the police do that? What happened? and what happened with police that that did that. And here is the response that I wrote off to Scholar Leah. I told her I hope that her and her family were well. I did not go to the protest due to COVID-19 and my concerns with the crowd. It saddened me to see that someone who looked like me had his life taken away. Looking at the protests around the world tells me that this is a global issue. I'm glad more people are speaking out against racism. I've cried, been sad, all over the place with emotions thinking about it. I talked to my mom and she thought I would protest. I share a lot on social media, Twitter, Facebook, donate to people who do work in groups and sign petitions. I'm not sure why the police did that to him or to any other people. The person responsible and others 3 are being charged and in jail now. I was asked to do some writing for people who work around the world. It's a chance to get them thinking and talking. Chat soon. Hope you have a great summer. And for me, when I reflected on this, I thought really like, how do we expose this scholar and how do we expose other scholars? And part of it is engaging and informing them of the work, our thinking outside of the classroom, having dialogue, questioning. And so part of what I did this year in the writing classroom was ensured, like I said, again, it was bringing their world, bringing local issues, bringing global issues into the classroom, but also bringing myself into the classroom and let them know that these are things that are big on my agenda, things that I believe, and I want to just share so you know and have a picture of who Mr. S is. And on the left, you have 2 pictures that were talked about and brought to our writing classroom pre-COVID. So these are topics and issues that I heard them talking about, topics and issues that, again, I felt should be engaged in, we should be engaged in conversation around. So one was in February around Black Lives Matter, and the other below was in February also around the coronavirus, because a lot of scholars were just scared and frightened. They didn't know or understand it. They had lots of questions. So starting to do a deep dive in that. And then during our online learning, 2 questions I asked them, and they emerged out of a webinar I attended. One was, what did they feel that they needed to learn between now? So the now was around March and the end of the year. So for the end of their academic year. And then the second question I added on was, who do you want to hear from? And out of that emerged so many things. Scholars said, I want to hear from doctors. I want to hear from lawyers. I want to hear from gamers. And so on the right, you have a couple of different folks. One group that works in the community here in Dallas, Texas, around homelessness and helping support different groups. And one below was a doctor who was visiting Europe and shared his picture. So with each of those people, we asked, who do you want to hear from? We asked them to share a picture of their choice to get our scholars sort of thinking around what it is that they potentially would be learning from this individual. And so I say this because, again, the big thing is, how do we expose and what do we expose our scholars to? Types of questions and discussions we engage them in. And sometimes that's not even in the curriculum. You know, these images weren't necessarily into the curriculum, but it was through listening to them, their voices, listening to their questions, things that they wondered, and bringing that into the classroom. And in the middle, again, one of the groups I'll share in a few, ALOC, we did a visual campaign focused on racial discrimination that was happening in China. And we had members, we called them to do visuals that represented, you know, a message to say that just because I am Black or someone is Black does not mean that they are a virus when it comes to coronavirus, because there was this emergence of discrimination happening against individuals who were Black and Black, African, and that were based in China. We felt that was wrong. And that was, again, one thing that I brought this image to scholars in a writing piece to open up a discussion to see what do they think about it and why do they think that was something that I was speaking up and speaking out against. So again, as change makers, we have to expose our scholars. We have to be open and willing to dialogue about issues, those tough issues, those difficult issues. When I think of community, one group that really jumps out for me is Black Male Educators Talk. And I think about this because as change makers, I think it's important for us to commune, to find others who are seeking change and in education in that space. And so a few years ago, I found this group of individuals. So in the US, where I'm based, Black male educators are 2%. And I was looking for a group, an org, open dialogue, opportunity to connect with others. And I found Black Male Educators Talk. And it's a professional learning space where we dialogue every Tuesday night on Twitter. But it's beyond that. It's grown into this mentoring, giving back, sharing of resources and opportunities that goes on. So I'm very grateful to Ayodele Harrison and William Stubbs, who lead this group, and other individuals who take different roles, from sharing different chat topics to resources and the such. And so I bring them up because when I think of community, this is a community that I've been a part of for 3 years. And so part of it as a change maker is finding your community. And the one thing I always say is, if you can't find it, that means that's an opportunity. It's time for you to create it. So as change makers, going back to, like I said before, change maker, I think of those who are inventors and those who are creators. So if you're not seeing or hearing what it is that you want, whether it's a discussion, then it's time for you to create it. And speaking of create, 3 years ago, I had a colleague who was turned down for an opportunity because she didn't look the part. And out of that led to setting up an affinity group on Facebook. At that point, it was called International Educators and Leaders of Color. And when I say affinity group, it's a safe space where people are open to share, to question, again, a chance to dialogue. The space is comprised of individuals who identify themselves as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, open to people who are working in international education or who might be interested in working in international education. And this group has sort of transitioned from affinity group into an association as of last September. And now our real big focus is on amplifying the voices of those individuals and really honing in on how do we advocate for each other? How do we share learning opportunities, as well as what does the research say? Because we're finding there's not a lot of research on people who look like us in international education space. So again, we as a collective are speaking up, we're speaking out. Members are highly encouraged to do that. When you hear or see something that is not aligned. And again, as a change maker, it's about taking action, which is our big thing. So for us who are on this webinar, as you expose your scholars, as you commune with other change makers, and as you take action, I leave you with this big question. How will you impact your world, your classroom, and deliver positive change for your students, the wider community, and society at large? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that absolutely mind-opening presentation, Kevin. And it's wonderful to see how you've been able to weave in so much of what's happening in the world around you into your classroom. And I think that that is so important. And I suppose that is exactly the point of teachers being change makers, teachers coming forth and talking about things around them, around us as a society, that require discussion, that need talking about. So how you were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement with your students, equally within other contexts, there are other important conversations that need to be had globally, locally, for a specific community or otherwise. And teachers are so well poised to actually initiate these discussions and to sort of moderate them and to bring in different perspectives from all kinds of spaces into the classroom to open up student minds about things that are happening around them. So I think that's one of the most amazing things about being a teacher, how even if you're teaching math or even if you're teaching science, a part of you is always ready to be an activist in some ways, to take on things in the world that matter to you as an individual, be it as a science teacher, it could be, environmental issues or otherwise, and I suppose that that with school cultures becoming more conducive to teachers actually taking these conversations to local levels or community levels or even national or global levels, which a lot of the, the newer initiatives and with all of us being online, we're able to carry out. I think it's wonderful to see that kind of change being brought about. One question that has come up that I'm going to open up to all four of you And this is something that I think all teachers at some level, at some point in time, all of us have struggled with, which is that I want to bring about change. There's a lot of resistance. How do I deal with that? And I know, Meeta, you are going to be talking about this in your presentation, but I thought we'll just maybe get everybody else's inputs on this and then go over to you. So can we start with you?
Me first?
Yes, please.
All right. I think the big thing, so we just started yesterday an online course called Swimming in the Deep End with Jennifer Abrams. And this is actually one of the topics. This is one of the 4 pieces that we're going to be discussing. And I think one thing that she said is expect resistance. We were talking about this last night on our opening session. Expect it. So I think as change makers, you have to expect. And I saw one of the questions around someone talking about talent. Expect that there are going to be people who question, people who don't like, people who don't want to change. And I think for us, is to be rooted, is to find others. I have had the honor and privilege to work with some amazing leaders. So school heads, school principals who've always encouraged, the work that I did. They've understood it. So like the school, and I think a part of that is ensuring, going back to that communing with others is, I always say when I'm looking at opportunities, I always, look up and research, people, places, contexts, and things, and ensure that there's an alignment. And resistance, I always say, from the coaching stance, it's always whenever there's a complaint, that's a request. So for me, I always sort of say, if someone's resisting, what is it really saying? And, is there a question, or is it an understanding, or is it something that they are seeking that may not be shared? What was the message? Is it something that's been tried before and didn't work? Is it an experience they had with someone else that, again, that sort of is sort of resonating with them, and a reason as to why they're, people don't want to change and want to be resistant. So again, I think it's a deep dive. And for me, I've always maintained it's about relationships. So it's going and making sure that we're having that one-on-one, sit down, open dialogue with who is resisting. So not ignoring it. I think that's the big thing too, is being willing to sit in front of resistance and having that discussion.
Addressing resistance head on.
In fact, just to add half a line, most of our job as teachers is to build engagement. Anything and everything that we do is building engagement. So just to add to what Kevin just said, even if you have somebody resisting you, or even if it's a troll online or somebody who's disruptive in a classroom, our job still remains the same. Engage to understand, engage to build, engage to construct, engage to lead, engage to find a way forward. The how remains the same with engagement.
I also feel that, the teacher is a leader in the classroom. And there are many ways in which, despite the resistance from the top, there are things that you are a role model for the kids. Now, whatever you're teaching, if you want to bring in empathy, you want to bring other stories, you can always bring them in. And, there's nothing to really stop you. Only thing that happens is you may not get recognized. You may not get that reward, but you get the reward of your children doing well. You see them doing well. You see your class blooming. That is your reward. And very often you do get recognized later. I remember once I initiated something at a junior school that I was heading, and I got blown up, to put it mildly, by the management. But 1 month later, they wanted what I was doing, and they replicated it across all their franchisees also. So, you just have to go ahead and do your gut feeling of what you think is good for the kids. Resistance is the part of life. It's always, you never have a time when everybody loves you and everyone wants to do it. It doesn't happen. So you have to navigate through that and stick to what you think is right and do it in the classroom. That's why I say the teacher is actually the true leader in the education system.
Absolutely spot on. I think that in this particular time, teachers have shown that more than ever. So there'd be no disputing on that front at all. Tammy, would you like to add something to that?
I don't know too much more to add because that was just encapsulated so well by everyone. But just back to what Kevin said about relationships and how critical they are at times like that. So when you have an idea to make a change and you need to approach your administrator or your team or whoever it is, it's in, first of all, how you approach that with them. And if you expect the resistance, then you prepare yourself for that and that kind of conversation. And you might not encounter the resistance you think you might have as well until you have that conversation. So it really does come back to like, how well have you developed the relationships with your colleagues so that you can move forward and talk about challenging things, which is hard for people, right? It makes us all sweaty and like, I don't want to do it. But the more you do it, the easier it does become. So if it becomes a common practice to just ask questions and present ideas, then it gets easier and people feel better about opening up and asking questions to move things forward when we know that they have to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Tammy. And on that note, I'm going to very quickly pass over to Meeta because we are running a little bit short on time. So Meeta, over to you to talk us through some of the things that you were just talking about in terms of engagement and what are some skills that people can actually build on when they're looking to become better leaders.
Was that a hint? Was that a very clear hint to me to sort of scrap half of my presentation? Look at that girl. But first, I have to say thank you very much for bringing such amazing panelists together. I have very little left to say, and the only thing I have left to do, honestly, is to just string together the things that have been said before, because every word of what was said so far not only resonates with me, it is something that is very deep and connects with my belief system about us in education. So I am just going to not talk about myself. You can look me up on my website, Meeta W. Sengupta, and start sharing my screen straight away. Do you have the screen, Pallavi? Could you just confirm that?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Great. So I just wanted to plunge straight away into a very complex slide, which only tries to describe the tsunami that Gowri spoke about. That we found ourselves completely stranded. You know, suddenly we were at school. Kevin, you said that. Tamera, you said that. So one day we were at school, and the next day we were not. And what did we have as leaders to hold on to? Well, we looked around and we said, okay, we have purpose. We know what we're supposed to do. We have people because we know who we can phone, and we have the internet, most of us. Many of us don't, and that's a whole other conversation. And we have processes to help us, but you know, they're sort of not quite working. So what we did, and Pallavi, I'm hoping that the community that we have here today extends this to the K-12 space, is we went to higher education institutions and we asked them, how did you manage? What did you do? How did you handle the transition? Because what we do naturally in a crisis also tells us a lot about who we are. It tells us about our soul. It tells us about our instinct. It tells us about what we truly believe in when we are being hit by the waves. And so we asked them questions, and we realized one very sad thing. I'm not going to go into all the outcomes. We realized one very sad thing that is playing out in many schools today, that we were very good at saying, class, let us hold on to a class and deliver the class. We were very good at delivery. Should we do exams? Yes. Should we have classes from 10 to 11 every day and then 11 to 12? Yes, we should be. We were very good at that. But what we were not very good at is actually supporting our teachers and learners. Some schools managed to do that very well, higher education and schools. And they were able to make this transition. Others could not. And after about 2 months of talking to over 500 teachers, actually listening to them, and thank you, Pallavi, you've again done a fantastic job in building these communities. I realized that these were these three things that we needed to give up. Our classroom had disappeared. Suddenly the walls and that room and that gate and that sign-in sheet didn't matter anymore. Our curriculum initially when you're being hit by the tsunami, how did it matter whether you managed to cover X or Y or it didn't really totally matter. The curriculum anyway is a tool. Content again was simply is a way for us to teach learning, the ability to learn, the skills of exploring, the skills. These things didn't cease to matter. And I'm not going to take very long because I love the way the previous panelists have explained this with examples. What mattered was how much you cared about your students. Did you manage to connect with them? Did you go online and in your fear, look at the screen blankly and say, what is happening over here? That is only fear. Or were you your authentic self and say, hey, listen, I care about you. And I care about your learning and I care about your progress. You don't even have to use those words for your students. All you have to say is, this is what we're going to do and how are you engaging with it? This is what is happening in the world around you. How are you responding to it? The connect, the Kevin stories of building engagement in the classroom using writing exercises, but actually understanding what was happening. Our students were scared, they deserved care. So just abandon the first three and move to the three core principles of building community. And it's not building community it's not a very highfalutin concept. We're not building community because we are all high-minded. Those of us, for example, who run budget private schools know that it is a sense of community that is going to engage parents and get them to pay the fees so that we can pay our teacher salaries. Community is a sense of responsibility for each other, a sense of looking out for each other, a sense of connecting with each other and being there for each other. It extends to practical things, it extends to the emotional space, it extends everywhere. It builds that safety net around us. Because we were hit with technology suddenly. Things that we should have been leading, we had people coming in and offering us, saying, do you want to buy our virtual reality package? Augmented reality is the very next thing. Actually, we did have some videos of some teachers in Kerala doing wonderful work with augmented reality, and we'd like to hear more of that. But suddenly there was this technology and there were buttons to press, and that's not what it's all about. Those are, again, our tools. Those are there to assist us. And we don't have to be perfect in them all the time. Teachers as leaders are not teachers as bosses. We can learn from our students. We can learn from our peers. We can learn from the tech assistant. We can have them come in and say, hang on, can you co-teach the class with us? And it works out fine. Because as teachers, I think one thing that we have to acknowledge that every leader knows that they come from a vulnerable place. Gowri, you said it beautifully when you started off. And you've told this another story at another time before. When you started off as a school head, you were looking around for guidance. Come the tsunami, we were looking around for guidance. Did we get that? We may have got some, maybe not the right kind. So what did we need to do as teachers, as leaders, and what do we need to do now? I'm again only repeating the words that have been said before by the panelists. We need to build relationships. Tammy, you spoke about the circle of trust that you build, people that you can approach. Gowri, you spoke about resilience. You spoke again about failure and learning from failure, which is the ability to take risk. Responsibility has always been our job as teachers, but suddenly our students were not there in front of us. So I think using the 6 lenses that I am putting out here on the screen, I would love each of us, there isn't time to do this as a workshop exercise, but I would love every one of you and all of us again to go through these one by one and saying, am I a leader in building relationships with my community? Am I, as a leader, what responsibilities have I taken on in the classroom that I had not taken on before? Have I been responsive enough to my students, or have I just been driving delivery in the classroom? I know I need to demonstrate and role play resilience in front of my students. Have I been able to do that? Because resilience also implies showing a little bit of one's own vulnerability Fall down 7, get up 8. Have I demonstrated that get up 8 times to my student? Have I been consistent and reliable as a leader? Because a leader will have to demonstrate all 6 of these. So that is a part of the how that you asked, Pallavi. But I would also like to place a paradox in front of us. Leadership can be of 3 kinds for teachers. One is personal leadership. We need to have that get up and go and that self-confidence and self-awareness to step up and step in front of the classroom. We have trained ourselves to do that. We know how to do that. Tammy, you spoke about peer engagement, where you go to the school, you find your circle of people who you want to influence, and you engage with them and you persuade them. Gowri, Kevin, both of you spoke about both in school and professional groups, the ACSD, Kevin, the institutions you have created. And you beautifully said, if it doesn't exist, create it. In a way, what you spoke about, Kevin, was the last 10 years of my life. Education policy, democratization of the education conversation does not exist. Create the group, create the community, find the people. But here comes the paradox. As you can either influence or you can try to be powerful. You cannot be both. You cannot do both at the same time. At the personal level, you have far more power over yourself. At the professional level, you are just one voice amongst many. Another part of the paradox. So what do you do? Do you try to exert power and tell people what to do? Or do you try to create influence and engage them and persuade them in building what is right? Having listened to the other 3, we already have the answer. But I'm taking a moment here to remind ourselves that if we are in the land of online learning, we have moved away from the old ways of a closed box classroom. We have moved away from the old ways where the teacher was the center of power in the classroom. And we have moved to a land where our students are actually free to walk away. They may put us on mute and they may walk away. Power is not what we want to play anymore in the classroom. And we have to admit, it is something that has given us strength in tough moments, in extremely tough classes. What we have to work with, Gowri, you spoke about facilitation. Facilitation is the first step to that. But again, inspiration, which is what you demonstrated in how you spoke today. Influence is the art of inspiration. And this is what we have to become for our students. Teachers, as leaders, our teachers are that inspirational beacon, that lighthouse that our students will flock to, not for content, but because we can build them in them that connect with themselves and courage to be themselves. So I'm just going to leave you with this last slide that talks about how, again, to be a personal leader, you need to find 2 things, and you have to be a personal leader first. Commitment, find what you really care about and commit to it, and be consistent about it. As a peer leader, find your core circle, and demonstrate and care for that circle. And as a professional leader, which will also be a part of your role, build your community and communicate well and consistently with them. So all of them engage with each other, but I'm going to pause here, Pallavi. I hope the how of what our other panelists have said has found some way forward, but this for all of us is a journey. All of us is a journey. And I'm hoping that we will all become the change makers without scaring the leaders around us. Alignment was a beautiful word that you used, Kevin. Change with alignment is the way forward.
Meeta, thank you so much for that. I think this has answered more hows than we had originally posed to begin with. And I think that this puts a lot of things in perspective for us when we think about ourselves as leaders, as educators, and as teachers, as leaders in our own classrooms, in our school communities, in the wider school networks, and even globally or at the national level, that as Kevin was talking about, and how small changes within classrooms can actually have impact across the world, across professional learning networks, across schools, across students. I mean, we all know the power of change in the era of globalization, where small movements, sort of catapult causes to large parts of the world. And I think teachers again are very well placed to bring about that kind of change and to be able to harness those kinds of ideas that their students have, and not just be change makers, but also promote their students as being change makers, and for that that kind of allowing for that kind of space within their own classrooms. So I can't thank all four of you enough for all of this wonderful discussion today. I think it was a fantastic note on which to conclude the Summer of Learning Educator Bootcamp. Some amazing ideas to wrap up all the great learning that has taken place across the last month. And it's been really, really wonderful to have shared this space with all four of you and your amazing energy and ideas. And I'd like to thank all the participants, some who have consistently joined us for every single session from the first one up until the last. Thank you so much for the love and the enthusiasm. And we're really, really humbled and honored to have been a part of your learning journeys. It means a lot to us that we were able to address your questions, solve some of your problems, and perhaps pose interesting questions for you to think about as educators as you move forward into what still remains a largely unplanned and unnavigated space within schools and within education. Thank you once again to all four panelists for joining us, and thank you to all the participants who have been with us over the last month. We would like to share with you that our webinars over the last month, all through the Summer of Learning, have reached out to educators in over 30 countries. We've been able to interact with over 65,000 educators. We've also been able to have conversations with lots of interesting people in our panelists, I'm referring to, from over 15 countries in various capacities, school leaders, educators, policymakers. And it's been really, really great to gather all that insight and be able to bring it across to you. And of course, there will be lots of interesting recap resources that will be made available on our platform. So we're hoping that you'll stay tuned and catch up with those and we'll be in touch. Our new set of workshops go live in the first week of August. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. And we look forward to having you with us for that. And thank you so much for being a part of Highr's Summer of Learning. And I wish all of you a wonderful week ahead and look forward to being in touch. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
That was great.
you so much.
Lovely.